We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Sorry that all of us have given all of our money to Avengers Endgame, but there it is. It's made all the money. That's the end of that.
This is going to become Pikachu. Like a video. It's going to be like the video game industry, where the video game industry sells 4 million copies of a video game and says it's not a success. Yeah, that's what Marvel movies are going to be like. Yo, I'm sorry. Did you make as much as Endgame? No? Okay. I actually talked my wife out of going to Endgame for Mother's Day. I'm like, listen, honey, you know I love you. You're going to sit in this movie, and you're going to want to ask me questions because you're not going to know what the hell's going on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, this, you need to have seen at least a few Marvel movies before Endgame, I would say.
And, well, I mean, I watched Infinity War with the kids in the home theater without my wife. Yeah. And then... So I sat with her. I would say, okay, you and I are going to watch it now. Yeah. And I'm going to sit here, and you can pause it as much as you want. Very good. Ask as many questions as you want, all that stuff. I'm like, darling, this is going to be a 3-hour plus movie, not including all the previews and stuff. You're going to want to go to the bathroom. You know, we're going to be there forever. You're talking about going to an 11 o'clock showing, so we're going to be done, what, at like 3? I mean, it's going to screw up everything.
2:30 at the earliest, yep.
Yeah. So I was like, no, honey, we're not going to do this. Let's do something else. So we went to it, but we have... Every third year, we buy season passes to Busch Gardens, which is the local amusement park here. Yeah. And, basically we can go for a couple hours and not have to feel like we have to spend all day there and whatever. But they just reintroduced beer back to that place, and they haven't had beer at Busch Gardens.
Oh, I thought that was like the whole thing of Busch Gardens was beer. So
they didn't have it since I've been here. Since I've been here, they have not had beer there until this year. And now there's a bunch of people walking around with beer, and I just look at them like, what is wrong with you people? Like, it is a jillion degrees out here, and I mean, it's only May, but it was miserably hot. And I'm like, okay, so now you're drinking something that's going to dehydrate you even more, and then you're going to shove yourself.
Drink beer on a hot day, though. That's pretty normal.
I do as well, but I don't do it when I'm sitting out in the sun. I mean, I got to do it as you're cooling off. It's part of the cooling off process. Anyways, it was good.
I don't know enough about drinking beer, that's for sure.
That's fine. You're not.
Well, I was just disappointed that somehow in its third weekend, Endgame still ended up beating Detective Pikachu, which, although, I mean, fair enough, because I didn't go see Detective Pikachu on opening weekend. I want to see it, but I felt like it would be weird for me to go see it.
That was my alternative to my wife. I'm like, listen, Detective Pikachu is out. You like to play Pokemon. You know who Pikachu is. You'll know who a lot of the people are, the Pokemon are. You'll know who these things are. It's supposed to be pretty good. So, we can go see that if you want to go see a movie. And she chose Busch Gardens. So,
well, that's fine. All right. We've got a gazillion questions.
Past due. Whatever we call that. Happy Mother's Day.
Oh, yeah.
We completely
belated. Happy belated Mother's Day.
That's the word I was looking for. Belated Mother's Day.
Well, especially if you're hearing this on Friday or this following weekend, then we're a week late practically. But
sorry about that, guys. And I guess specifically gals. But yes, sorry. Happy Mother's Day.
We all have mothers. We wouldn't exist without a mother. That's one thing we can all agree on.
I hope you guys all get your mom some new speakers. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to www.avrant.com. Leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/avrant podcast. YouTube.com/avrant. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. All right. We'll thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, all you have to do is support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is becoming a patron over at patreon.com. This is a sustaining membership, a subscription, if you will, where you sign up for a minimum of $1 or a maximum of infinity dollars a month to be given to us from you. So we want to thank our 80 patrons, including Mel, who let us know that he's a new patron. So thank you, Mel.
That's right. That's patreon.com/AVRant Podcast if you'd like to sign up. And thanks very much to our 80 patrons over there, including Mel. Thanks for being one of our patrons, Mel.
Thank you. And if you can't support the podcast financially, you can always just support it in some other way and let us know how you did it. So Rob, not this one, a different one, let SVS know that his dual PB1000 subs that he purchased was because of our recommendation. And Damien, mentioned us to accessories for less when he bought a Denon X4400H. So
congrats on those purchases, guys. Rob and Damien, thank you very much for talking us up. And if you would like to make a one-time financial donation and you don't want to sign up for Patreon, you can do that by coming to our website, avrant.com, and over on the right-hand side, it says support the podcast. There's a cup of coffee link there, and it'll take you to PayPal. And you can use that for a one-time donation if you'd prefer.
Yay.
Yeah.
In the news, Samsung is rolling out firmware update that adds Apple TV app and AirPlay 2 to their 2019 and select 2018 TVs today. While many other TVs will be getting AirPlay 2 support in the near future, only Samsung TVs is getting the Apple TV app built into their TV's own interface as of now. So
that's right. Yep, they're the only ones announced to do that. I'm sure they have some kind of limited time exclusivity agreement because that was a big thing that they were talking about alongside Apple. But that update is out today. Today being Tuesday the 14th that we're recording this, so that's when that takes place. And you got one of the brand new Samsung TVs, and you don't want to buy an Apple TV separately. You know, the separate little box there. Well, hey, it's all built into your TV now. So
there you go. From our listener, Carl, Hub Entertainment Research, or HER, published the results of a survey taken online sampling 5,131 U.S. consumers for their study, Entertainment in the Connected Home. The headlining result is that 47% of respondents say they have at least one 4K TV, but only 55% of those 4K TV owners have ever watched any 4K content that they know of. So that's like 25%, basically. 68% they have a smart TV, but 14% of their smart TV owners say they've never connected it to the internet. That doesn't surprise me. Actually, that's a lower number than I would have expected.
Exactly.
I would have expected out of 68% of the people who have a smart TV, 60% would never have connected it to the internet.
I also think the number of people who have a smart TV is higher, but many don't know it.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. 54. I would say, and 54% still use some type of external streaming box, not just the built-in apps. Again,
that
probably
would be
because I would probably be the same boat because why?
Yeah.
42% still buy TVs in person at the store, which I guess is fine.
I think that's kind of low, to be honest.
Yeah. See, that's 58% buy it online. That seems high. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
An additional 22% make the purchase online, but physically pick it up at the store. Okay,
so there's that.
30%. I guess if you want to save on shipping, yeah, that makes sense. Especially like Walmart and Target, they have that sort of thing. 32% say the research on which TV to buy in they do that in store, and 32% say they read online reviews, and 32% say they read online customer reviews, but don't know how much overlap there is between those groups. We don't know. Because that's if you add all that up, that's more than 100%. So they're not exclusive; they overlap.
That's right. They're not saying 32% only research in store and 32 only online reviews and only customer reviews. But I also don't think that's a 100% bubble where literally only 32% of people research and they do all three. There's probably some spreading around there, but.
Oh, I'm absolutely sure there's people who go to the store, buy a TV. They're like, oh, it's a smart TV. It does this. It does that. They're like, does it just make a picture? Yeah. Okay. Well, give me
pretty much.
Which is the?
Can I make it brighter somehow? Can I make it bluer?
What's the cheapest 55-inch one you got? I want something this size, and I want the cheapest one you got. Take it home. It's a smart TV. They take the cable out of their cable box, which their cable box guy hooked up for. It's composite, by the way. And then they hook it into their new TV. And somebody asks them if they have a smart TV, and they say no. So
how come I don't have to screw this cable into the back of any of these plugs? How come it just pokes in?
I like the old style. Screw it in.
That's right. More secure.
I remember when you had like little antennas that you would screw in back there.
Little rabbit ears.
Yeah. Not just rabbit ears, but like wires. So bad. I had the thing in my house in the house I grew up in California, where you had the little box, and then you turn the knob and you could hear the antenna on top of your roof. Facing the direction north, south, east, and west. Nice. Like if I wanted to get certain stations, I had to face it towards Sacramento. And if I wanted to get different stations, I had to face it towards Modesto. So I think you guys figure out where I live from there. There you go. All right, let's go to some questions here. Mark this is going back a ways, but Mark followed a bunch of our advice for his theater. He now has it fully acoustically treated. He also got a front three set of ELAC Unify speakers to use instead of 3 in-ceiling speakers that were already installed. He says the ELACs are easily the best speakers he's ever owned. They sound so much better in clarity, detailed dialogue, intelligibility, and soundstage and imaging. So yeah, there's that.
Yes.
He asks, is the dramatic improvement due to proper speaker placement, the quality of the speakers, his new acoustic treatments, or all of the above? I think it's the box that you've got the center channel on.
Yes, he doesn't have a center speaker stand just yet, so he was using the shipping box in which it came. But that's fine. It got
That's
it up
awesome,
to just
man.
about the perfect height. So
Yeah,
nothing
I would
wrong
move
with
that speaker so that the front of it was in front of the box. But other than that,
well, I would venture that that's temporary, so I won't knock him too hard.
Yeah. So he asked, why is everything sound better? Well, it is everything.
Yeah.
It is everything. I don't know what speakers you've heard in the past. So, I mean, if you've just heard those in-ceiling speakers, well, then it is definitely everything. But it is possible for you to take better speakers than the ones that you have objectively measures better than your speakers, put them in a room that's not as good as your room, and you would think that your speakers were better because of the room.
Sure.
So I think that it's everything that you've done here.
I would say all of the above. I would, however, say, like, let's say he didn't get the ELAC speakers. He's just still had the in-ceiling speakers, which are still up there. I mean, he hasn't, removed them. But let's say he just had that and just added the acoustic treatments. I would think that would make much less of a difference than the changing of the speakers to these ELAC Unifies that are properly positioned. So I think of those 3 that the acoustic treatments probably did the least, although I do still think they did something. Yeah. But the least out of the 3. I mean, let's say he got speakers that weren't quite as good as the ELAC Unifies, but he was able to position them this way instead of in the ceiling. I think that would make a huge, drastic difference. And then the ELAC speakers being very good speakers only helps that even further. So to me, I think it's actually just that they're not in ceilings anymore, that these are proper forward-facing in-room speakers. I think that makes the biggest difference, as long as they were any kind of decent speaker. And then the other 2 following that. That's my ranking.
Okay. So there's zero question in his mind that the 3 ELAC speakers up front are completely worth it, but why are 5 in-ceiling speakers, as he was using before, so inferior? We always cringe on the podcast and try to find an alternative to using nothing but in-ceiling speakers, and now he's heard the results for himself. But could we explain why that's the case? It was originally his plan, as he's seen all in-ceiling setups in other houses. So can it ever sound good? Why would installers suggest it or agree to install it if it's never going to sound good? Never is such a hard word to agree to.
Maybe not never, but it's you're starting behind.
Okay. It's right.
Deficit.
You are starting in a huge deficit.
Yeah.
Putting the speakers up on the ceiling in where they are meant to fire straight down. You now have to buy speakers that are going to be angled, which most of them don't want to do, because the whole point of the clean installation look that you're getting is that the speakers are flush. So there's no way to angle them towards you so that you get a more direct sound,
except for what they do with those 15 or 20 degree angled ones, where they're actually kind of like one end of it is further recessed into the housing of the in-ceiling speaker, so that the drivers are angling out towards you, but it's still probably not aiming directly at you. I mean, I guess you could maybe get the ceiling height and the angles just right, but that very often isn't the case. I would say that, I mean, this affects your front 3 a whole lot more than your surrounds or surround backs. Like, I could tolerate in-ceiling surround or surround backs because those are supposed to be more diffuse.
Right.
And that, again, it's not what I would say is optimal, but I wouldn't go as far as saying, oh, I'm really going to cringe at that and say it's bad. But your front 3 speakers, I'm going to cringe when you're saying that they're in ceilings, because we are very good at hearing what's directly in front of us, much better than at hearing what's behind and above us. And we are very key to those direct sounds and what direction they're coming from. So it's quite easy for us to tell, well, that isn't coming from right in front of me. It's coming from above and in front of me. And it just doesn't sound quite right. And I'm off axis to all of those speakers. So some of that high frequency detail is going to be missing. So
I think of it this way too. I mean, when we're talking about speakers, right, they have optimal performance cones. There's a cone,
right,
or an angle at which they perform the best. Some speakers need to be be faced directly towards you. Some they don't. But usually, it's within like 30 degrees.
That'd be typical, I'd say, yeah.
Dead on center.
Like left or right of dead ahead center, 30 degrees to either
30
side.
degrees
to
either side, right? And most in-ceiling speakers, you'll be lucky if you're at 30 degrees. So now you've got a speaker that is in compromised placement. It's compromised in its functioning because of how good it can actually be in general, because you have to put it in the ceiling, it has to fit within a certain box, it has to have a certain aesthetic, everything else. And then you're sitting too far off axis from it. I mean, there's just so many things that are going wrong.
And you want the illusion that it's right in front of you, not above you. And we are quite good at hearing those directionality cues. And I know somebody's going to come back and say, wait a second, you've been saying that your top front Atmos speakers should be firing straight down, and don't all of these off-axis concerns apply as well? And the reason it's different is because those are supposed to be diffuse, and you're only supposed to get a general sense that they're in front and above you. And so we're not working against that off-axis dispersion, because we're not trying to make our Atmos speakers sound like they're pinpoint and directly in front of us. And we're not trying to create that illusion with Atmos speakers.
And you are operating with a speaker that is not nearly as far in front of you as
that's also true. Yeah, it's not right at the front of the room.
Right.
It's 45-degree elevation angle, so it actually is from the front wall away. When you mount like front height speakers high up on your front wall, we do have those angled towards the seating position and not aiming straight down. So all of these angles come into it, how far off axis you are from the dispersion cone, and then the fact that these are in front of us, and it's hard to convince us that it's directly in front when it's actually above and firing down.
So he's got a pair of Dayton Audio MK402 speakers on hand. He's still using his in-ceiling speakers as surrounds. Would mounting the Dayton speakers on his sidewalls provide a worthwhile upgrade, even though the Daytons aren't very expensive? Well, it would allow you to use your overhead speakers as Atmos.
I mean, that's the thing. There's no reason to take those down and stop using them. You can convert. You have 5 in-ceiling speakers. You'd only be using 4 out of those 5. But still, you'd be making use of them if you go over to Atmos. So that's one way to look at it.
That's the way that, in the end, you could always just try it. You could just, if you want to just see what's the big difference between the side surrounds and the overhead surrounds, you could just give it a try. It's literally speaker cable, so it's not a huge deal.
Yeah, and I would give it a try. Temporary stands that you just put them on, just to get a sense of, does having them. So again, we wouldn't recommend, even though Dolby would recommend. We personally on this podcast wouldn't recommend actually having them right at seated ear level. We'd have them a little bit elevated. We know that he has 2 rows of seats in this theater, so you'd want it so that they have a clear line of sight from the tweeter to all of the seats, and that means they're probably going to be elevated a little bit, maybe 1.5, 2 feet elevated for the tweeter above where your ears end up when you're sitting down. But yeah, you could try that as a temporary. It doesn't have to be pretty at all, but just to give it a try. I don't think the price of the Daytons has anything to do with it. The MK402s are perfectly decent speakers. I wouldn't say they're the equals of the ELACs, but these are surrounds. They don't have to be exact perfect matches to still be acceptable. I would definitely agree. Give it a try.
Yes, what wall mounts could you use for the Daytons? They don't have to have. They don't have any pre-drilled inserts or wall mounting hardware. Well, a little piece of plywood and a couple of little wall brackets, and you got yourself a shelf.
Make yourself a little shelf is definitely a possibility.
That's like $5
and I know those MK speakers from Dayton are not particularly heavy, so it doesn't have to be a super duper beefy shelf. If you don't want to do a shelf and you want something pre-made, you can get the side clamping wall mounts, which also allow you to angle and tilt and aim those speakers in any way that you want to, and they don't have to be terribly expensive. If you just head on over to Amazon, how much are these ones? Like $45-$50, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
No, not even that. These ones are $28 from Mount It, and they'll hold up to 55 pounds, and those Daytons are nowhere close to that. So, easily affordable if you want to go that route.
All right. Rob on Facebook. Rob thanked us for a discussion last week, and he's decided to go with the RBH Impression Series speakers plus dual SVS subwoofers rather than the RSL 5.1 speaker package that he was considering. Yay! I guess, yeah. His theater area is 13 by 15 by 8, but is currently open to the rest of the basement, but he's considering constructing a wall to close off that the theater area. Then he has plans to construct a new house in the coming years. He intends to have a dedicated theater in that house, which would fall in the medium room size according to Audioholic's Baseaholic room size guide. So since they're the same price, should he go with the dual PB1000s or the dual SB1000s? Medium.
Around 3,000 cubic feet, let's say. Well, I mean, I'm not even super planning for this future house because it's not here today.
Right.
And who knows what the future will bring. But we do know he has an open room right now. And if he does construct a wall to close it off, it'll be 13 by 15 by 8, which is small, but not tiny.
I mean, it'd be fine for SB1000s for sure.
That would be, but his currently open situation, not so much.
Not so much, right.
And if you do end up with a 3,000-ish cubic foot room in the future, I'm leaning PB1000s all the way here. As long as if you do close off your 13 by 15 by 8 foot room, that you'll have sufficient physical space. They are large. Make yourself a cardboard model. Know exactly how large they really are, but I wouldn't. They're not so large that I would worry about them in a 13 by 15 room. That should be fine. And a PB1000 will play super happily in that size room. It'll also be the better choice right now with your open situation. And if you do have a larger room in the future, they'll be ready for that too. So I'd go PB1000s.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards the SB2000s, to be honest with you.
But it's more money.
It is more money. But in the end, I think you're going to end up with similar performance, smaller foot size so overall, no matter what direction you go in the future, you end up with more options. Having to work around these very big boxes, and they are quite large. They're like 19 inches by. Yeah.
I mean, they're the smallest ported box that SVS makes, so at least you're not talking about the absolutely ginormous ones. But
it's pretty ginormous.
The difference between a PB and an SB of any type is significant.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree, except for the fact that they cost more. So if it's about the price.
If it is about the price, I guess. But I think that as far as just making your life easier in the long run, if you can shell out the extra couple $100 for the SB2000s, I would go that direction. Okay, so he will be installing an acoustically transparent projection screen, which begs the question, where the heck is he going to put these PB1000s, but whatever. Would the dedicated RBH Impression Series center provide any benefit over using a third bookshelf speaker as the center? It can probably play louder, would be my guess, but if you have acoustically transparent screen, I would 100% say go with the third bookshelf speaker in the center.
Cost less, it'll just stand vertically, they'll all be at exactly the same height, and if you do hear a difference in a pan between front left, center, front right, or vice versa, it's not the speaker that's to blame, because you've got three identical speakers. So, no, I mean, it costs less, so not really any benefit for going for the horizontal center. I say go for three vertical bookshelves. And they do sell them individually, not only as pairs, so that's nice.
Right. Due to size constraints, if he goes with the 120-inch projection screen size that he would like to have for his 10-foot viewing distance, the right side of the screen will end up very close to a wall, and that is part of the reason he wants acoustically transparent screen, so that his front right speaker won't have to literally be on the side wall. Mm-hmm. But even with his front three speakers behind the screen, the space is tight with the 120-inch screen size. So he is considering an Elite Screens Aeon frame with their acoustic UHD screen material. The Aeon frame is their nearly borderless option, and it's about the only thin bezel plus acoustically transparent option he's found that he can afford. So do we have any concerns about that choice? Any alternatives or suggestions we would suggest? If they're going to be behind the screen, who cares how close it is to the side wall? That's what I'm a little...
No, he's saying that the screen itself, if he went for one with a thicker frame, he might not be able to get the 120-inch screen size that he wants, just from the additional thickness of a frame. So he's like, this way I can have the screen size that I want. It's got a super thin frame around it, and then I can have my speakers behind that screen, and it all works out.
Well, 10 feet from Elite Screens, you risk being able to see the weave on that. Usually 12 feet is kind of like the no one can really see it from here point.
Yeah. I mean, the chances are, for sure you're making the right choice within Elite's offerings of which acoustically transparent fabric to go through, because I would go with nothing besides the acoustic UHD one that they offer, because they have a AcousticPro 1080 or whatever, and that one, not only is it a coarser weave where you could much more easily see that it's a weave from 10 feet away, but also the AcousticPro 1080 isn't really the greatest in color accuracy. So definitely the AcousticPro UHD. That is the right fabric to go through. It does have a little, like if you're, being persnickety and you're measuring it with a meter, it does have a little bit of color shift, but it's not so much that you couldn't calibrate away from it, or that you probably won't even really notice it even without a calibration. So that's fine. The Aeon frame makes sense because you just need that physically. So I mean, all the alternatives that I like a little bit better just because they're objectively that much better in, no color shift and even finer weave would be like Illusion Visions or Seymours, which are thousands of dollars. The Illusion Vision one is like $3,000. The Seymour one is like $2,700. So they're definitely more expensive than this one, which is like $900. So it's a huge price gap there. And the only one that would be around the same price or less is Silver Tickets, but their weave is coarser than the AcousticPro UHD, and they don't even have any in stock right now that you can buy, although it does bring the price even lower. But yeah, I mean, all things considered, I think you're making the right choice. Do be aware that you might see a little bit of the weave, but probably only if you put up like solid colors, like when it's real content, you're probably not going to see the weave from 10 feet away. The AcousticPro UHD is pretty darn good. So yeah, all things considered, I think that is the right choice.
So with his front 3 speakers going behind his screen, he wants to hide wires or eliminate wires as much as possible. He plans to have one subwoofer up front. Most wireless subwoofer kits seem to cost around $100. Then we mentioned a less expensive option. Why isn't everything going up front? I mean, if he's going to hide the wires, the only wire that you would have to have is the ones going to your surrounds and your subwoofer at the back of the room. Why don't you put everything behind the screen?
Like including his equipment?
Yeah, sure. Why not? All you need is an IR blaster.
I suppose,
If
yeah.
you have a Harmony remote, you're not going to
to
do this whole thing without a Harmony remote, right?
Hopefully.
I mean, you're not going to go IR after this.
Yeah, hopefully.
So put it all up there.
Yeah, I mean, other than something where you have to physically put discs in, but you are going to have some room below your screen. It's not going to be like right to the floor. So even then, if you want to have somewhere a stand below your screen where you can have equipment there, yeah, I would have to agree with that. I don't know though. Maybe plans are different. Or maybe
this is
an
equipment rack or something.
Yeah, maybe everything is up front, but he wants a wireless sub at the back of the room, right? Which we could dig. So yeah, Dayton has their offering that you can get from Parts Express. It is their Wave Link, and right now it's on sale for $52.80 for one transmitter and one receiver. It is a stereo transmitter to a stereo receiver, but no problem using it for a single subwoofer if you want to. And you do have the option of adding more receivers to that single transmitter. I believe that one transmitter can transmit to up to 4 receivers simultaneously, so...
it depends on exactly, too, what you're doing. If you're going to end up with hiding more than just, that is a cheap solution for one speaker or a couple of subs, and that's great. But if you end up like, okay, now I've got speaker wire to hide, I've got this to hide, I've got this to hide, your baseboards can be pulled up and things can be put behind them. You can put crown molding around the room and basically hide everything behind the crown molding. Or you can use flat wire, that sort of thing.
Use flat paintable speaker wire that can be spackled and painted over. Yep.
There's other options. So just if only thing you're trying to do is get the subwoofer to the front of the room, which I don't know how you then are going to power these 3 speakers without also hiding those wires. Wherever you hid the speaker wire, you should definitely be able to hide.
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of almost wrote verbatim what was in the email there. So
I hear what you're saying. I hear
it could be that he's saying, it's the one at the back that he wants to get the wireless to. So that could be the case.
Yeah. All right, Adam. Adam bought an LG C8 OLED. He loves it, but there are other OLED models out there. Oh, Adam. Once you buy something, don't just stay off the internet. Stay off the internet. Except for us. Some reviews claim Sony's OLEDs are just a little bit better. Others flat out say Sony's OLEDs aren't worth paying any extra. But now with both C8 and the LG C8 and the Sony A8F on clearance, the price points are really close. So there's any argument for returning his C8 and getting a Sony instead? I'm just going to say no.
Well, in particular, the A8F, I wouldn't choose that particular one, the A8F, over any of the LGs, mainly because the A8F doesn't offer dynamic tone mapping for HDR.
Okay.
The A9F in the Master Series does. But in the A9F, you can't turn it off. It always does dynamic tone mapping on HDR10. So the dynamic tone mapping is where the TV itself analyzes the video, the HDR10 video, on a frame-by-frame basis and adjusts the light output frame by frame within the TV itself. It doesn't need my dynamic metadata in the source itself to do it. It just, the TV is doing that processing itself. And so on LGs, you can toggle that on and off in your C8 manually and choose whether or not you want it. On the Sony A8F, it doesn't have dynamic tone mapping, and if you got the A9F, which is more expensive, and in the Master Series, you can't turn it off if you wanted to. So that's on the HDR side. For whatever reason, the Sonys from that year, the A8F and the A9F, if you were watching Dolby Vision, they didn't map Dolby Vision correctly, and supposedly that's still in the works, and there'll be a firmware update to fix that, but it hasn't come out just yet, whereas the LG C8 works with Dolby Vision just fine at the moment. So it ends up coming down to Sony's video processing, which is the thing that the reviewers who really, really like it, that's the thing they laud. Supposedly it does have a little bit better upscaling if you're still watching standard definition.
Okay.
Maybe don't worry about that too much. And then, well, actually, the next thing is the next thing with the motion. So we'll answer it then. Yeah.
So the one thing that bothers Adam a little bit about the C8 is that he thinks he sees a little bit of soap opera effect on some content, even though he has the motion interpolation. LG calls it true motion, completely turned off, and anything else like noise reduction or any dynamic settings also turned off. A common refrain from reviewers is that the Sonys handle motion better, but is that some type of motion interpolation turned on? He just hates any hint of soap opera effect. So would a Sony OLED be better on that front? I'll go ahead, tell him, Rob.
Right. So it is mostly when, yes, you have Sony's version of motion interpolation turned on. What are they? Motion flow. That's theirs, right? So one of the things is that motion flow set to a low setting introduces less soap opera effect than just about anybody else's motion interpolation. Frame interpolation, but it's still some. And still artifacts, which bug me way more than even the soap opera effect. Like, you know, when somebody's mouth moves and it turns into three mouths, like that bugs me way more than anything. I'm like, no, I can't tolerate that. That is horrible, right. And it's especially bad on animation. So I just don't turn that on. So then, what happens if you don't have any frame interpolation turned on? Is the Sony any better? There are some small little differences in how much they're pumping and dithering the light. This is one reason why they sometimes claim that Sony's are a little better in the just above black areas, because supposedly they dedicate more bits in their version of how they upsample everything to 12 bits in the processing, and they dedicate a little bit more bits to the lowest down there, and they don't have to dither quite as much, and gets very technical into those things. It's a very small difference, if it's there at all, without the motion interpolation turned on. So most of it is to do with them saying, oh, you can turn on motion flow to its lowest setting without too much soap opera effect. I'm like, no, it's still too much, and the artifacts are intolerable to me. So then he's like, well, what's happening with his true motion? He just turned it off. Why is he still seeing seems like some soap opera effect? Well, the first thing I want to do is actually not have true motion turned completely off. It is better to turn it to custom and then set both of these sliders. There's a de-judder and a de-blur slider. Set both of those to 0. Because the reason you want to do that is when you have it on but both of the sliders to 0, everything is being shown at 120 hertz. But if it's a 24 frames per second signal, it's just showing each frame 5 times with the slider set to 0. It's not interpolating any new frames, but it's showing them 5 times. Whereas if you don't turn true motion on at all, the TV is attempting to refresh at 60 frames per second, which would introduce judder, and then you turn on something they call real cinema, which tries to compensate for the 24 frames per second being shown at 60 hertz, which doesn't work too well, and that leads to some of this weird-looking motion that goes on. So real motion on or real cinema on is fine, but turn the true motion to custom and then put both sliders down to 0. And even when you do that, you might still notice that some slow panning things look a little bit smoother, and you might think that soap opera effect than you're used to, and that's because you're probably like me, because I still notice that. But it's just because we've become so used to judder, we've become so used to 3:2 judder, that when you see it completely smooth like that, where each frame is just shown 5 times to you, that that looks a little bit oddly smooth. But if you try to go back, then you'll notice how herky-jerky 3.2 really was. So, yeah, a little bit probably is in your mind, but there is a true motion setting for you to change.
All right. David. David is back once more to try and finalize his amplifier choice. Didn't we try to talk him down off this mountain again?
We did, but he's back. We can do it again. It bears repeating.
All right, he has settled on his KEF R series speakers up front and three E301 satellites as surrounds and surround backs. So his hardest decisions have been made. But since he's running a 7.2.4 setup, he needs at least 2 channels of external amplification. Of course, that has sent him down the rabbit hole, as we described last week.
Yes.
He's heard our recommendation, Tom saying to get the 2-channel Dayton APA 102, and Rob saying he go with the 5-channel Emotiva Bass Ox A500. But what about the used market? Would either of us consider buying an Emotiva amplifier off somebody on Craigslist? Is there an easy way to test the amp before he buys it? Some way to check its condition? I mean, yeah, you have to bring a speaker.
You gotta bring some speakers.
A source. Yeah.
And a source. You got to play. I mean, there's
no other way to do it.
With a solid state amp, class AB amplifier, like what Emotiva makes as an XPA, which is, what I know he was considering off of Craigslist there. I mean, as long as it isn't damaged, someone hasn't dropped it and a transistor has popped loose or something like that, it should outlive all of us. There's no reason why it shouldn't be perfectly fine. And if something has gone wrong, it should be pretty obvious. There might be a hum, there might be a buzz, or a speaker might just fail to play. Like, it's not usually a super subtle, a veil has been added to this sound type of difference. It's a pretty on-off situation.
I've had amplifiers break on me, and it's not subtle.
That's right.
You plug it in and that speaker doesn't work, or you plug it in and the speaker does something absolutely awful.
Yeah.
So those are sort of your options. The only danger in doing this, would be if you end up getting some sort of 60 hertz hum because of a ground loop.
Sure.
But that that's probably unlikely, especially if you plug everything into the same outlet.
Right.
And don't use a cable box as your source.
I would say, as long as this person doesn't totally creep you out and you'd want to get out of there as quickly as humanly possible, do have it plugged in and let it be plugged in and playing something for a little while.
Right.
Because
let it warm up.
Yeah, it's not so much the warming up of a solid state, but it's just that it is possible for something in the power supply, like a relay or that, to have a malfunction, which might be the reason this person is selling it off. So it's possible for an amplifier to function for like 10 to 15 seconds and then shut down because of a fault. So don't just like literally plug it in. Yep, sound came out. Okay, I'm good to go. Like, let it go for at least a few minutes.
And when I said warm up, that's what I meant. I meant like let the box itself physically start getting electricity and stuff, so that it has to start giving off heat just in case there's some sort of like loose wire in there that's fine for the first couple of minutes and then suddenly pulls away because of heat by the second, minute
because like the
like
faulty amp that I had in one of my previous Epic subs, it had that where like you could turn it on and it would play for about 5 to 10 seconds, but then there was some kind of fault in that amp and it would shut itself down.
Right.
Again, not subtle, but give it, a little bit of time just in case there's a fault like that. But other than that, it should be fine. There's nothing about a Class AB solid state amp where I'd be like, you're not going to notice it if you test it out. It'll be pretty obvious if something's wrong.
So he's thinking of a used XPA3, which he's seen on offer for about the same price as a brand new A500. That would give him around 200 watts for each of his front 3 speakers. Any thoughts? Yeah, whatever, dude. Jesus, just buy the
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary.
But it also... look at the amplifier that I bought. I can fit right into this crazy crowd. I'm not gonna, put you down for wanting the beefy.
I'm not putting you down, but
amp.
You clearly are going to buy an amp. At this point, I just want you to buy one. You've worn me down, sir. At this point, I just want you to just pick one and just tell me how much you love it.
I favor this over getting just a 2-channel amp because I'm like, power your front 3, power your front left, center, and right if you're going to do it. Why not?
That's right.
Then they're all running off the same thing. It's not necessary, but there's no real downside to it either. So. Off you go.
Just get the Dayton, but whatever. Infinite Gary. So Gary says there's a video on YouTube where a YouTuber, a youth man, does that name's not going to last. He does a little experiment with some Klipsch upward firing modules, Atmos modules. He already has some in-ceiling Atmos speakers, but he just wanted to give the pair of up-firing modules a try so that he could hear for himself whether they are convincing and compared to what they sound like to his in-ceiling Atmos speakers. He came away fairly impressed. He ultimately said his in-ceiling Atmos speakers were still the better option, but if you can't or just don't want to install in-ceiling or on-ceiling speakers, he was pleasantly surprised at how well the up-firing modules worked, at least in his theater.
Right.
He wasn't sure if his own judgment was swayed by knowing he was listening to upward-firing speakers, so he brought in a couple of family members. He disconnected all of his speakers except for the upward-firing modules, and then he got his family members to point where they thought the sounds were coming from. The vast majority of the time, they pointed to his in-ceiling speakers, so it seems as though the upward-firing modules were doing a pretty convincing job. That's not how psychology works, but we'll get to that in a second. So naturally, since Gary has upward-firing modules in his Atmos, this led Gary to wanting to experiment too. But he wanted to take it a step further. Gary wanted to find out what the effect would be when listening to just a 5.1 mix, so that anything played out of the upward firing modules would be coming from the Dolby Surround upmixing. And in one instance with the movie Master and Commander, I can't believe anybody still watches that movie, but whatever, he found that he got the most convincing illusion of sounds coming from overhead by just using the straight 5.1 playback mode. It's a 5.1 mix on the disc, and playing it in just straight 5.1, no upmixing of any kind, actually produced the most convincing overhead effects that Gary has heard. Switching on Dolby Surround upmixer actually diminished these overhead sounds. So Gary wants to look at the big picture. We have all these options for adding more speakers around us, but how much do any of the speakers beyond the traditional 5.1 setup really get used? And have we reached some level of sound maturity for our home theaters where maybe 5.1 was actually all we needed? Now we're just tacking on more without any true benefit. What do we think? How many times have I said Atmos is kind of pointless for me to before somebody hears me?
And people have gotten mad at you for that. Yes,
dude, it's fine. Okay, so Gary. I did this little experiment with my wife and everything else, and everybody does this sort of stuff when they get new speakers or they do these tests. They bring in family members; they don't know what the hell that they're listening to, which is fine, you know, as sort of a blind test. And they say, "Where's the sound coming from?" And they point at a physical speaker that they can see in the room where the sound is supposed to be coming from. They don't know that the Atmos upward firing modules are a thing, much less that they might be playing that sound. So psychologically, you know, their brains are like, I hear a sound, it feels like it's supposed to be up in this area here, therefore it must be coming from that speaker, therefore I'm going to tell you it's coming from that speaker.
Now, the thing is, he did still have his, front three speakers up front, his left, center, and right towers up there. He had these Atmos modules that are firing up, but he had the towers up there, and the modules were on top of the towers. So if it was completely ineffective, no upward firing effect at all whatsoever, then they would have been pointing at the front towers, right?
That's true.
If it truly only sounded like it was coming from in front of you, then, even though this is a flawed test psychologically because they can see in-ceiling speakers up there, so there's some assumptions being made, we would point to the front speaker if it was completely ineffective. So, I mean, I've heard upward firing modules myself in person, and I don't think they're as good as physical speakers in or on your ceiling, but I'm pretty much everybody ends up in this general amount of agreement where we're like, yeah.
How old is this article? Because I feel like this article
this
has
is quite
been
new.
written.
This is quite recent.
Yeah, but this is the same conclusions they've been coming up with since basically Klipsch put these speakers out. I mean,
sure.
That's what it is. And the reason these things work is it's just phase. I mean, there is no physical bouncing of the stupid sounds off your ceiling.
Well, I think it's the EQ. It's that head-related transfer function EQ that Dolby is applying when you say, I'm using upward firing. I think that's... I mean, this is why Sony can put out an Atmos soundbar that has no upward firing drivers whatsoever, but it equalizes the sound in the forward-facing drivers to make trick your brain into thinking that it came from somewhere above you. So I'm quite convinced at this point that that's where the vast majority of that effect is coming from.
And as far as like hitting a point where we don't need any more speakers, we hit that. We hit that. I'm still not convinced that surround back speakers are all that useful. I mean, they do something. There's no doubt
Gary's
about
kind
it.
of on board with you. He's like, maybe 5.1. Maybe that was it.
How many times on this podcast have I said, no, stop at 5.1? And people are like, well, what about Atmos? No. Why? You don't. Your budget is $1,000. Why are you even thinking about putting ceilings on your speakers? Ceilings on your speakers is like spinning rims on your car. They most of the time don't do anything, and when they do, you barely notice it. So you're in the car at the time. Are they spinning or not? You can't tell.
Probably notice it more than the spinning rims on your own car. But no, I mean, the other person who agrees with this is like Christopher Nolan. Dunkirk comes out on Ultra HD. It came out in IMAX. That sound mix has been 5.1 from the beginning and all the way through. Chris Nolan is like, no, 5.1. That's the sound mix. I'll go back to the example that the first one that super convinced me something was going across my ceiling, which was The Others, which was on DVD at the time in vanilla Dolby Digital 5.1. But it 100% convinced me that someone was walking across my ceiling. Like, it just completely worked. So if it's mixed really well and effectively, it totally can convince you that something is coming from above, even without speakers above you. Yeah. But the reason I'm more on board with Atmos, maybe even just as a concept more than a practice, but it's the object-based audio. To me, that is a significant thing, which I don't think we've hit the pinnacle of what can be done with that technology. No,
I agree with that 100%. Yes,
and I think we could potentially do a lot more with object-based audio. So to me, that could very much be worthwhile, and I don't think we completely topped out with channel-based 5.1.
We haven't topped out. Even before Atmos came out, when we started talking about object-based audio, my dream, and I think that's still it has still yet to be realized, and I think it should be. I think that's where we should be going. Is we need to stop requiring people to place speakers in certain places, and instead say, okay, here is a device. Here's like a little thing. Put this on your chair. Now point it at your front right speaker. Point it at your left speaker. You know what I mean? And like a 300, like a little orb thing.
Well, I mean that's what Trinov does. Is just you have to pay a minimum of $30,000 to get it. So
therefore we know where all your speakers are, and then the processing then can give you the best experience for your room.
Right.
And that's, I think, the real advance in audio.
So what we want to do is bring Trinov's technology down to an affordable price point. But object-based audio would be a huge part of that. The last part there that Gary said, how much are the upward or the overhead or upward firing actually used? The same guy, Youthman, he did another video where he just played in this case I think it was Blade Runner 2049, but he just disconnected everything except for the overhead speakers, so you could hear what was solely coming out of the overhead speakers. And that happens to be a movie where the overhead speakers are used quite a bit, including they put music up there.
Right.
In the overheads. And like there's that nightclub scene in the first John Wick where they also put music up there, and that's why it's one of the more effective Atmos demonstrations to really say, oh yeah, those ceiling speakers, the upward fire ones, really are doing something. But I mean, again, it's entirely up to the mix. They can put as much up there as they want to. A lot of movies put very little, but a few examples put quite a bit.
When it comes to OLED versus LCD, we often see the comment about how LCDs can still get brighter than for HDR and produce much higher full color eye output. But what is the actual goal? Are we literally aiming at real world levels of light, like walking out in sunlight? I mean, I don't know, dude. We don't need 10,000 nits. We know that.
But that is the I mean, that is what the container, that is what the format can hold, is up to 10,000 nits. Right. We don't have any displays that can do that yet, not even the mastering displays, right? Dolby's own Pulsar tops out at 4,000 nits, but that's a real 4,000 nits that they really could do, and it has to be water cooled and everything for that to work. So I mean, we have an objective number. It is 10,000 nits. That is ultimately what this format is aiming for. That is nowhere near as bright as sunlight. Sunlight is in the millions of nits, so it's still nowhere near as bright as actual sunlight. But we are aiming for something. I mean, that's enough f-stops that there's no way your eye could look at something that's at 0.005 nits, which is the absolute bottom of what HDR could be, versus 10,000 nits. There's no way your eye could look at that without your iris closing down. Right. So if you, and I kind of fall into this camp too, where I'm like, I don't really know if I want my pupils to have to move, because that means if I go from a particularly bright scene to a particularly dark scene...
Still happens. It happens in Star Wars. You go from like the space scene to they're on Tatooine and the robots or whatever, or 3CPO and R2D2 are on there, and you're like, okay. For the first couple of seconds when you saw it in the theater. When I saw it in the theater,
and maybe a theater is really dim. I mean, it's 50 nits is where it's topping out.
And I mean, that can happen with a regular movie as it is right now. Do we need 10,000 nits?
Then imagine what it'll be with 10,000.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that that's where we should be going. But the idea, I think, there's the whole, the bigger the number, the better the number. There's that
Yes.
issue. But
Well, when I've seen examples of what I consider good HDR where it is just very small highlights and using it to have more detail, like where you're shooting a sky scene where there's lots of clouds and you can have considerably more detail in those clouds,
Right.
or in a snowbank or something like that. That's what I want out of HDR. I want greater detail, and those really tiny little glints in that. Those are really fun to look at. But I've seen examples where they have just had a whole scene that's like 300 or 400 nits, and it's just way too bright, and I don't like it at all. And this obsession that some people seem to have with full screen brightness. Oh yes, this TV on a 10% window can hit 1200 nits, but it can't do it on a 100% window. I'm like, why on earth would you want it to? I don't understand that mentality
this is
at all.
Give J.J. Abrams 10,000 nits and see what he does with it, because
Sure.
he's going to beam that directly into the back of your skull.
Yes, he is.
100%. So I don't think we really need it. Anyway. All right, so Gary recalls how at age 12 he replaced his shelf of model airplanes with an FM tuner and an amplifier that had been built from a kit and a pair of bookshelf speakers. He's been into audio ever since. So what were our first setups that sparked our love of audio? We've talked about this before a couple
Have
of
we?
times. I have.
I mean, we talked about our first surround sound setups.
That
but
is
we
where
talked
I
about-
started loving audio. So.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. What was it, Tom?
Well, I mean, okay, so I guess if you wanted to take it way back, I mean, Sony Walkman, my first Sony Walkman. I had a Sony, I guess they were all Sonys, now that I think about it. Or maybe it might have been a Hitachi or something, but it was a dual cassette and CD player combo box thing that was like, it wasn't a boom box. The speakers were detachable and stuff like that, but you could attach them on there and it had a handle that you could carry it places, though I never did. It was like my first like high-end system, and I got a CD player. The first CD player in the house and everything else, and I immediately went out and bought a CD, and I hated it. I didn't like the CD. Don't at me, but it was U2's Joshua Tree. I just was so disappointed in that CD. I was so angry at it for not being what I expected U2 to sound like after the few songs I had heard from my friends. But I didn't really start loving audio until I heard surround sound for the first time, and that was in college. So I had been to movies and stuff like that, but I had just watched Jurassic Park on it. I got into widescreen VHS because I knew enough about audio and video to know that the widescreen, you were not missing anything. There was no cutting off, there's no cropping.
Yeah.
So I had bought the widescreen, and I had just watched it at my house, and these guys who were in the same apartment complex came over, friends of my girlfriend, and they found out I had it. They're like, oh, why don't you bring it over? We'll watch it. I'm like, dude, I just watched the movie. He goes, no, you haven't watched it yet. So brought it over. They all worked for competitor to Circuit City and Best Buy. I think they were called the Good Guys or something. They weren't called the Good Guys. It was something like that. They've all closed down since then, but they worked there, and all three guys worked at the same place, and they all had AV receivers, analog, very first generation, big, massive speakers. They may have had a subwoofer, I don't know, but what they definitely had was neighbors who were afraid to complain about them. So it was like 11 o'clock at night, and Jurassic Park was going like full blast and full surround sound, and I was like, "What? How are you getting this? How are you making this happen?"
Yeah.
That was an amazing experience to me. So that was where my journey down the audio, audiophile, or the audio and video track really was from that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there was a difference between I've loved movies for as long as I can remember. My first job was in a video store, and DVD was still quite new. We had a DVD shelf, and then the rest of the store was VHS, and even that DVD shelf was a brand new thing when I started my job. So, but I'd loved movies for a long time, but for my own thing, it was like, I went to the movie theater for the huge screen and the great sound, and then when I came home, it was going to be on a VHS tape, and it wasn't going to be anything like being at the movies. And I didn't have the concept in my head that unless you were a multimillionaire, that you could have a home theater experience at the time. Same thing, I made sure I got the widescreen version on VHS whenever I could, but the idea of a true theatrical type of sound and being super into home theater, that hadn't really sparked yet. It really started when I got my first DVD player. and that had Dolby Digital, and I'm like, how do I play this? And that led me to getting an RCA home theater in a box, and which was the first thing I had that could decode Dolby Digital. I think it cost about 350 Canadian dollars, and set that up in a bedroom that my sister had just recently moved out of. And honestly, even then, it didn't all click until I watched the first X-Men on that system.
God,
because
you're so young.
The first X-Men on that system, the opening scene when they're in the rain,
Right.
I was in this little bedroom with the speakers quite close, and I had done enough research that I had set up the positions of the speakers correctly, and the rain was so convincing in the one seat in that room. I was like, oh, this is like next level. Even the theater didn't sound like this.
Right.
And that sparked off everything that has led me to where I am today.
God, working in the video store with one row of DVDs. For my birthdays, we would have, when I was young, we would rent a VHS player and a couple of discs. I think one time we rented a Betamax. I mean, that's how old this is. And a couple of cartridges. And that would be, I would have people over and we would watch movies for my birthday. That's how old. My first VCR had a remote with a cable.
Okay. Yep.
that you had to click on it. So yeah, cute. All right, Rob, different Rob. This is Rob M. Excuse me. Rob heard us mention the Wirecutter quite a few times on the podcast, and we've passed along the recommendations. They've just updated the list of best projectors, and it includes the likes of JVC's NX5, that's a genuine 4K projector, the BenQ HT5550 and the 2150 ST. For an upgraded 1080p model, they've listed the Sony HW45, and they've got a Pico projector and projection screen choice, which is silver ticket. I'm going to get confused by all that.
Yes.
So Rob would like to hear what we think of their list. Should people stick to these choices, or anything we would change, add, subtract? I mean, I don't really care. Go on.
I mean, Chris Heinonen is the one who puts together the projector list for the Wirecutter. I like his reviews and I like his takes on pretty much everything that he writes very much. It's rare that I'm in disagreement with him. So there are more than one best projector list over at the Wirecutter.
Right.
Well, the one that Rob M sent me the link for is like their overall, where they just take a smattering. They're like, okay, you want a 4K projector? Here's our pick. You want the most inexpensive but still decent 1080p projector? Here's our pick. Here's the best one for a small room, best one to travel with, and if you want an upgraded dedicated theater but for the least amount of money, here's our pick. Right. So it's these overall categories, but each one of those you could drill down into, because they could say, okay, here's our list of 4K projectors. Here's our list of 4K compatible. Here's our list of darkroom theater. So they have multiple lists in there. So if you put it all together, I don't think there's hardly, maybe I could point to one example or something. I'd have to go back and find it. Nothing jumps out to me as anything I would disagree with or particularly change. And even though, like, for example, on their current 4K list, they still have the X590, which is now a discontinued model. But right at the top, they're like, we're in the process of updating this because we know some of these models have been discontinued. So, like, just bear with us. It'll be here in a week or two. So
I'll be honest with you. I mean, like, projectors and displays in general, I mean, objectively, it's very easy to measure them and to categorize them. So, I mean, you look at the price and you look at the performance. And unlike speakers, which are so room dependent and, you know, setup dependent and a lot of other things that can happen, you know, you can have vastly different experiences with speakers from room to room. Whereas with a projector, turn the lights off, cover the windows, and they're all going to look the same. They're all going to have the same basic performance, provided that your screen material is all, you know, up to snuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, the BenQs that are on there, how many times have we recommended those?
The 2050, I think we've recommended at least once per episode for like the last 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah, and so, I mean, maybe you're going like, oh, you know, Rob in particular hasn't been super gung-ho about the genuine 4K because it's $6,000 for the NX5. And technically,
our recommendations are almost always based off of your questions. We don't recommend a $6,000 projector. Somebody says it to me or to us, you know, I've got $2,000 to spend in my home theater. What projector should I get? I'm like, well, yeah, you should get the $6,000 one, but you don't have $6,000, so get the $1,500 one or the $1,000.
But it's also like, you know, maybe why isn't the X790 that Rob likes so much? You know, why isn't that the pick? Well, I mean, Also at the Wirecutter, they're putting together value and they're saying, okay, someone is coming at this and they want the best bang for the buck because that's what the Wire is all about. And they're like, well, the NX5 does offer something that the X790 doesn't offer in addition to just more pixels, which is that they have JVC's newest version of HDR tone mapping, which you'd have to manually enter into the X790, but it's there, automatic in the NX5. And maybe the average person is willing to take a nearly imperceptible loss in contrast in favor of that, you know? And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. I can get on board with that. So like I said, there's basically, I'm in pretty much full agreement with the lists that are put together there. And even better that, you know, once they're completely currently upgraded, he's like, yeah, for sure the Epson 5050 is going on this list. Just bear with us. It'll be there.
It's and to those of you out there that are unsure of what you're hearing right now, this is what it sounds like when people are authentic and ethical. Because we don't sit there and try to downplay the work of others in order to make ourselves more important. You know, a lot of times when you go to websites or reviews or news outlets, they're going to badmouth everybody else to make themselves look and feel better. And
we're not getting paid, so what does it matter to us?
Yeah, go to the Wirecutter, knock it out. Look at all their ads. You know, they've got lots of good information.
I go to the Wirecutter very often. I like the way that they approach things. It's rare that I've ever felt misled by one of their recommendations. And the thing is, if you actually read through their whole articles, because their actual reviews are very lengthy, it's like they explain things in excellent detail, and they're like, you know, here's the reason why even though maybe we found one that we think is slightly better in this particular area, they're looking at it as a whole or as a value proposition or whatever, but they explain all of that. I'm like, that is all entirely fair, and it gives you enough information that you're like, well, this one thing is the thing that I happen to care about the most, but they'll probably mention it because they talk about the competition as well. So, no, I'm very in favor of the Wirecutter.
Jason on Facebook, back in episode 641 or 461, depending on how you looked at it, when we were discussing bookshelf versus tower speakers, we made some side comments that you don't necessarily need any speakers, that you could use headphones in your home theater instead and still get a great experience. Furthermore, we said that so-called surround sound headphones that use multiple drivers for each ear are really just a gimmick, that it's all processing, which could allow a regular pair of headphones to deliver an excellent home theater experience. So what's that processing? Jason works odd hours, so his movie watching time when others are asleep, and he would love to be able to use headphones without having to give up an experience of full surround sound speaker system. So could we please elaborate? Well, it's phase, basically, is what it works out to be. So in order for a surround, you know, when you get a stereo image, right? So you have two speakers that are playing the exact same thing, and they're separated, you know, from each other. Then those both hit your ear at the exact same time, which gives you a stereo image of of it being in the center of those two speakers. That's that stereo image. Now, if you vary the phase, meaning that one speaker gets its sound gets you slightly earlier than the other one, then it tells your brain, okay, it's closer on one side than the other, so it's over to the right or to the left. And then if you change that phase, it'll basically go through that stereo image, through the center image, and then back out the other side if you slowly do that. And you can hear that Queen is the band that first, mainstream band at least, that first used stereo imaging to move sound around the soundstage. That was what they were known for. That's what they made that a thing. So you can go back. I mean, if you can't find anything else, like I use specific albums that have specific pans in them. So the idea that you can pan left and right is true. But when you put the speakers on on your ears, you can do even more than that. You can go left, right, forward, back,
but it can
top,
also
bottom.
be difficult with just any standard recording to not have that headphone, it's inside of my head effect.
Right,
which if you're trying to say, like, he's taking this as, can I put on headphones but still have the same experience as a full surround sound system where it doesn't sound like I'm listening to headphones? So, I mean, we kind of mentioned this last week when we were talking to Ted, who was saying, you know, can I get an upgrade without upgrading my headphones? I'm like, well, what you could do is do something very different. And the thing to do that would be the Smith Realizer. I mean, that is the type of processing that, I mean, it goes beyond just phase manipulation. This puts microphones in your ears and plays test tones to get an exact head-related transfer function that is unique to you. and then also measures the headphones themselves so that it corrects for any frequency response differences between different types of headphones that you might use with this processor. And then it takes the measurements from a real speaker system in a real room, and it applies all of that to come up with a cumulative output that is exceedingly convincing to your brain that played through headphones, you're listening to real speakers in a real room, and it doesn't sound like it's inside your head at all. Now, this is essentially a full AV receiver. It has HDMI inputs. It has full Atmos and DTS-X and Auro 3D processing. They have two different versions of it over at Smith. They have one where you can actually sort of put your headphones around the thing itself. It looks like a headphone stand, and then they also just have a standard one that you could put on a shelf or in a rack or something like that. But they are about $4,000, right? So this is like a flagship receiver. But hey, it's doing full 11 speaker processing and all the rest of those things, and giving you an effect that essentially nothing else can give you. So if you're really talking about the true experience of this sounds exactly like I'm listening to my surround sound, except I happen to be doing it through headphones, the Smith Realizer is the way to do that. Now, the $150 alternative to that, if your only source is your PC, is the out-of-your-head software. Right. Because that uses the same idea as the Smith Realizer. It's the same idea of applying a head-related transfer function, equalizing correction for your headphones themselves, and then profiles of real speakers in real rooms. And to combine all of those things together, you have to pay for the software, and you don't really have the opportunity to actually measure your own ears. You have to go by other head-related transfer functions that are there, and you sort of have to just do trial and error until you find one that works particularly well for you.
First experienced this, and I tried it out. There was only a very limited
generic. There's a free trial, but it's only a generic head-related transfer function. Yeah.
Right, but there are a number of different heads that have been measured, so you just gotta find one that most closely resembles your head.
Yeah. And you probably will. I mean, there are thousands at this point.
Yeah,
but lots. I mean, that's a lot of trial and error. But chances are that you'll find one that works really well. But because all of the processing in the software version is being done on your computer, it can only apply it to things that are being played by your computer. Whereas the Smith Realizer hardware, you can plug anything into it, but it's $4,000 versus $150. But really, that's the way to do what you're asking to do. That is the processing that will do it. The other ones like Dolby Headphone or DTS Headphone X, right? These things do exist. I haven't found them to be nearly as effective. I mean, nowhere near as effective as what the Smith Realizer does.
Well, who would have thought for $4,000
yeah,
that would be better?
But those do exist. But honestly, if you want just a generic one that I promise you it will not sound like real speakers in a real room, but it also won't sound just like traditional headphones where everything is inside of your head, Yamaha's just basic headphone output from any of their receivers. Yamaha allows you to apply any regular surround sound decoding even while it's being output from headphones. And it's okay. It's not nearly the Smith Realizer, but it's better than just the traditional headphone sound, and that's just a Yamaha receiver, nothing else.
Yeah. So Mel has a 10 by 15 by 8 foot room, a theater room. It's a 2-seat setup with the seats 8 feet from the TV, well, so almost on the back wall. No, it's 10 feet long.
No,
a large bookshelf, a large bookshelf takes up almost the entire back wall, so he's got a pair of surround back speakers in that bookcase. Then his side surround speakers are on stands pretty much right at seated ear level directly to the sides of his 2 seats. Up front, he's using Martin Logan Montage Towers and the Vignette Center. These are not electrostatic speakers. They use Martin Logan's advanced thin film tweeters, and his surrounds and surround backs are motion 4 speakers using Martin Logan's folded ribbon tweeter. He has a pair of top middle speakers directly above his seats. It's all being powered by a Denon X4200H, which maxes out at 9 speakers. And he has a pair of ELAC debut S10 EQ subwoofers, one in the front left corner, one in the rear right corner. He's got drapes to cover his windows. He mostly watches at night, so it's close to pitch black. He uses a bias light behind the 65-inch OLED. Its floor is carpeted with thick pad, but the rest of the walls are bare at the moment. He wants to further improve the performance of his theater, and he's got about $3,000 he could spend, but isn't sure what would get him the most improvement for his money, so he's coming to us. All right, so we have some pictures here, and he is right. There is literally, there's some pictures on the walls, but there's a window on the right, the rear right, and there's some pictures on the left, and there ain't nothing up front. I mean,
That's right. No, I mean, I'm glad he's got that bookshelf behind him. That is
nice
definitely
diffusion.
better than just a completely flat, hard wall. So I'm good with that.
Yeah. So that's what it looks like. So he asked, should you replace the speakers? So do you not like them? I mean, is that the problem? Is a problem with the not liking them? Because I mean, these are not bad speakers. To put it very, very mildly, these are decent speakers. Very nice.
More than decent. However, I mean, they do have some characteristics that you wouldn't necessarily expect from just a traditional dome and cone speaker.
Right.
They are more directional. They are still Martin Logans, even though they're not full electrostats. They do still have the open back behind that thin film. Tweeter there, so this is like it's a true dipole going on there.
Right.
So they do have some unique characteristics to them, but that's not the first thing I would point to here. I mean, you can absolutely get something that sounds different. That is unquestionable. Whether you would prefer it or not is highly suspect. I'm not sure, but
I will tell you what I would do if this was my theater. Okay, that's just what I'm going to tell you to do.
Okay.
The first thing I'm going to tell you to do, the first thing I would do if it were my theater, is I would unplug the surround back speakers. I would start with that because I don't necessarily think they're doing a whole lot back there. I would also put room treatments right behind my front speakers and to the right and left of my front speakers to catch the first reflection points that are going on there.
That seems very doable. I mean, that is flat and plain up there at the front of the room, so your first reflection points on the side walls and behind your speakers on the front walls should be, I mean, as long as you don't completely load the look, and even if you do, you get ones that are printed so that they look nice and pretty. We already know you have pictures on your walls.
Well, and you got colors on your walls too, so just make them the same color as your wall.
Yeah.
I would take my center channel and I would move it to the front of my entertainment center.
That guy is all the way back there. Now, I mean, they do have this vignette center, which can actually be wall mounted. So I think maybe that's where that thinking came from, that it should be up against the wall. But when you have a large shelf like that in front of it, no, that should definitely be pulled forward so that it is flush or proud of the front of that shelf.
Right. And I mean, the side surrounds, I would probably move them back a little bit, just a touch, and if you can move them up, that would be great, but if not, that's fine where they are.
Yeah, I mean, they are right to the sides of your ears, right at ear level right now, so when they play, I wouldn't be surprised if it's literally distracting when it plays, and we don't really want that. So yeah, if you can elevate them a little bit, and we're only talking like a foot here, although, on the one side there, it's right in front of the window, so I could see why maybe you don't want to do that. But I would scooch them back a little bit. They can be between 90 and 110 degrees is Dolby's own recommendation. And when it's like that close to you, I would scooch them a little bit behind you. Again, we're only talking maybe a foot and a half, 2 feet.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I would do. I mean, I would put room treatments wherever I could, but the places where I think you definitely need them are behind your front speakers, to the first reflection point of your front speakers. Behind you right now, you've got that bookshelf, so that's kind of okay.
Yeah.
That's, and then if you could throw a couple on the walls anywhere else, that would be great.
I mean, in his particular case, with these particular speakers, the front wall treatments might do more than a lot of other speakers because they have that open back on these.
Right.
That's going to make more of a difference. And because these are more directional speakers, the side wall reflections might not be as much as traditional speakers with wider dispersion. So there might be a little bit of playing around. Maybe don't get all the panels at once if budget is super tight or something like that. But definitely,
it's got $3,000. Right? I mean,
That's true. That's true.
We're not near $1,000 yet.
Yeah, we're not going to be telling you that we really think you should upgrade or change your speakers right this minute.
No, I don't think so. No. What about you? What would you change?
I'm in agreement with all of that. Yeah, I mean, the side surrounds were a question. I mean, honestly, the first thing that jumped to my mind was nobody is sitting in the middle of this seat. Nobody has the ideal spot. I mean, maybe you always watch with 2 people, but even so, I'm like, I want the middle of that seat.
I might
change your seating.
Yeah, and you can't sit in the middle of this one because there's a cup holder.
That's right.
In the middle there. So.
Yeah.
So you're either going to get more sound in your right or more in your right ear or more sound in your left ear based on your surround
Guaranteed,
speakers.
yeah. Unless you're sitting right on that armrest, which would feel weird, I would think.
So the first thing he asked was, should we replace the speakers? We're saying no. The second thing he asked is, should we get absorption panels? We're saying yes.
Yes.
Third thing he asks is, his ELAC S10 EQ subs come with ELAC's options for EQ, including using your smartphone and their app to automatically EQ the subwoofer's output. And of course, his Denon X4200 includes multi-Q XT32. So what should he use for EQ purposes? ELAC's app, Odyssey, neither or both. You should use Odyssey. I don't worry too much about the ELAC crap.
As much as I like Andrew Jones, and I don't know if he's the one who came up with that equalization app, that doesn't work. Fundamentally, you can't take a near field measurement of deep bass frequencies inside your room and then use that as the target curve for what the frequency response should be at your seat. The sound waves are way too long at bass frequencies for that to ever work. That you could theoretically use that for high frequencies, but it cannot work in the bass. And that's the basis of how they did it. They say take a near field measurement, that becomes your target curve. And I'm like, no, unless you take the near field measurement outside and then move everything inside, which I guess you could, but it's not described that way. Those aren't the instructions.
Why would you though? I mean, the room makes such a big difference that taking it outside, you're like, okay, so you're correcting for the fundamental deficiencies of the subwoofer itself, but you don't know how those deficiencies or efficiencies are going to play out in the room. You got to measure it in the room, but you're certainly not going to measure it a meter or a couple of feet in front of the stupid.
So I wouldn't use it. What comes with that ELAC at all as far as EQ goes. Use the app to during the initial Odyssey setup phase where it gets you to change the volume level of the subwoofer independently itself. Use the app for that because you can do it from your seat instead of having to walk up to the thing. But that's about it. Don't use the ELAC EQ. That's my recommendation.
So he paid for the professional TV calibration service offered by Best Buy. He actually had them calibrate 2 TVs in his house. He thought they improved the picture on both TVs. So what's our opinion of their TV calibration service? Would an independent TV calibrator do anything much better or different? Unfortunately, there's no way to accurately answer this question. What do I think of their TV calibration service? I think it very much depends on who walks into your house that day.
Yeah, I mean, they are partnered up with ISF at least now. I mean, going back years ago, that wasn't the case, but at least now they are partnered up with ISF, so they should have at least a basic level of training to proper targets, because before the targets they were using weren't even right. But now that they're partnered up with ISF, at least they're doing that much. At least they're going for the proper targets.
Yeah, and would an independent TV calibrator do anything much better or different? Again, without knowing what they did, the reality is you probably didn't need to pay for it in the first place. With just a modicum.
Although he says he thinks that the picture looks better.
That's fine. But I'm telling you that I think that with a modicum of Google research and just asking us on the podcast what to do, you would have gotten probably everything. Even if you a professional TV calibrator, you would have gotten 90% of what the TV, or maybe 95% of what the professional TV calibrator of top-notch quality, the best out and the best. We get you 90% of the way there pretty easily because of how good TVs are out of the box these days. We've talked about it on the podcast before. So, do I think it would be worth you hiring an independent TV calibrator to do anything else?
To further do anything beyond what the Best Buy
My answer would be no. I would not have them touch it. Yeah.
I mean,
I would like to know what they did, what the Best Buy guy did, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, according to their own thing, it's a 2-hour service, which is short for most independent guys spend more than 2 hours, so they're limiting the amount of time. They specifically say unless you pay extra, they won't touch your AV receiver, they won't look at any of your sources. It's just the TV, right? Test pattern generator into the TV, one input, calibrate that within 2 hours, and we're out of here. That's what they do for their $250 over at Best Buy. So an independent calibrator would very likely do more than that. They will also charge more than $250. Most charge at least $400. Yeah. But as far as the TV itself on that one input, what was calibrated, would it be a huge difference between the independent calibrator and the Best Buy guy? It could be the case that the Best Buy guy you happen to get does a better job than an independent guy does. I mean, it really is down to the individual,
on that one
just like
input.
Tom said.
Yeah. So, open-ended question, he says, lastly, with $3,000 to spend and his room as a starting point, what would we recommend? What's the best way to spend that money to get the most improvement in his theater? If I had $3,000 to spend and I had everything that's in your room, I would spend a couple $100 on some room treatments.
Yep.
I would do one of two things. I would get a $2,700 TV to put up front. That's much bigger than the one you currently have. Or I would get a new couch that allows me to sit in a not necessarily.
I mean, these are nice seats. It's just that this is a very narrow room and nobody gets to sit in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of I get like, and reclining is still possible. Like my seats in my home theater are like a 1.5. No,
right.
1.5 wide, 1.5 butts wide. So my butt plus one of my kids' butts can fit on one of my seats, and they recline. So, the only thing I'm missing is a cup holder there in that scenario. So, if it were me, I would maybe consider doing that. Those are the two things I would look at.
Yeah, I'm right on board with both of those. If you're just like, nope, all of that staying the way it is, he's on board with the acoustic treatment, so we know that. Out of the sound system, the thing I might upgrade would be the subs. Because those subs, by ELAC's own claim, minus 3 dB at 28 decibel, at 28 hertz. And
for like $1,000, you can get like 2 subs that would annihilate this room.
Well, yeah, because this is a small room, and it does have a door.
SB1000s would just
it could be PB2000s for sure.
Oh yeah.
So I might consider a subwoofer upgrade in here as far as the sound thing goes. Whether you change speakers, that is entirely just if you want something considerably different from what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
If you like what you have, there's no reason to upgrade that.
Yeah, I think get that first bounce off the back wall. Is probably the most important thing to do. I just hate the design of dipole speakers. I just
fronts. I
just don't like them for almost
anyway,
anything because
we actually have a thing coming up later if we get to it that they were beneficial for someone, but it made sense in his case. Yeah.
The reason being is because you can't uniformly know what's behind a speaker in anyone's room.
That's right.
And a true dipole speaker is firing in both directions. So for those of you that don't know what a dipole speaker is, in this case, you might be thinking like the tetrahedral ones that that we always see as surround speakers. But a true dipole speaker is where the driver material itself is open on both sides.
Right.
So when it pushes forward, the sound the sound wave is being pushed forward. When it goes back, there's a sound wave being pushed back.
Yeah.
So my problem with true dipole speakers is you never know like how they're going to angle them, where in the wall that's going to go, but you always know that in front of a speaker, between the speaker and the person, there's going to be air. Okay, behind that speaker there could be a bookshelf, there could be acoustic treatments, there could be a corner, there could be open space, there could be a wall, there could be any sorts of other things. That are a subwoofer back there. You don't know what's back there, so that's why I don't like dipole speakers for this type, especially for this type of situation. Martin on Twitter, the BenQ HT5550 is available now, and while it is $1,000 more than the BenQ 3550, it's $500 cheaper than the Epson 5050. So does the HT5550 give Epson's 5050? How many fives?
I know, right? I can't help it. Those are the model numbers.
A run for its money while costing $500 less. Of course, it has to cost $500 less. It can't cost $400 less, or $300 less, or $600 less.
Got to be fives and zeros.
All the fives.
I was careful when typing this one to not make that mistake. So there are some exceedingly clear logistic differences between the 5050 UB and the 5550 from BenQ, which is that the lens on Epson's 5050 UB is fully motorized and it has lens memories, and none of that exists on the 5550. So just in terms of what the lens can do, that's an obvious objective difference. Plus the amount of horizontal and vertical lens shift that Epson's 5050 offers and the amount of zoom range that it offers is just considerably larger than what BenQ's 5550 offers, although at least it does offer both horizontal and vertical lens shift. It's manual, but at least it offers it, which is kind of rare on a DLP projector. So that clear difference. Now, the Epson 5050 UB does still have noticeably, obviously darker black levels. It is an ultra black, that's what the UB stands for, whereas the 5550 from BenQ is still the least expensive, wobbles it 4 times DLP chip that still has a small, much improved over last year, but a small halo around the entire image and black levels that just aren't as black as the 5050 UB. So does it give it a run for its money? In some respects, it's
right.
just as bright. It now does just as wide color. It now does HDR really well. They both do. Both of them have new tone mapping for this year, and HDR looks much better than any previous projectors. But there are some very obvious, if you have a blacked out theater, the blacks are clearly better on the Epson, and the lens is obviously features that you don't have on the BenQ. So I think the $500 difference in price, Epson can justify it in those ways.
All right. John John is back to further clarify his garage speaker question. We warned him away from using in-wall speakers in the garage, but he would not be installing them in the wall that goes between the garage and the house. He'd be running direct burial wire outside of his house and to an exterior wall of his garage. He says he has worked on houses that have in-wall speakers in the exterior wall of a garage, and he liked the clean look, so that's what he wanted to replicate in his own garage.
I'm still against it, but...
So with that new info, any recommendations for in-wall speakers that can play nice and loud for $200? I mean, so this exterior wall, I guess this is the problem I'm having, because I have seen garages that are enclosed, have garage doors and everything, but they have like holes in them, in the exterior walls, like lattice works of brick. It looks like brick, sort of openings, and it keeps whatever. So the problem here is that you don't want as far as, okay, I'm just going to say it outright. We are not contractors. We don't know the laws in your state. We don't know. So maybe you are, in which case you could say this is legal. If it's legal, then do it. Then fine. You can get your in-wall speakers, go with it. My trepidation, or our trepidation, is we don't know if it's legal.
Yeah.
If it's up to code.
For just regular interior in-wall speakers that don't have a backer box, there potentially might be code things to be concerned about, which would affect your insurance if you ever have to make a claim, and that's why I'm still hesitant to say anything like this. But he says he's worked on houses. They've done this before. He's going to do it.
People do all kinds of stupid stuff that's not right.
I think we've done the covering our legal side of it, because we're saying not to do it still. But
I would not buy anything. I still would not buy anything that wouldn't have a backer box on it. I would not buy a regular. I would buy some sort of RV or boat.
Well, that's just it. I mean,
speaker.
so I came to the
idea
those
are not $200.
There are marine installable speakers. Now they're round, they're not square. So if you were all about the look of a square in wall speaker, then this won't count. But the marine speakers, JL Audio actually has some 6.5 inches that are $210 for a pair. So, and JL Audio, those will play loud. I have no concerns about anything made by JL Audio as far as playing loud goes.
They do like loud over there.
They like loud. But, I mean, these are marine speakers, so we'll know they'll stand up to the weather. They're fully enclosed on the back, but they are the round shape, but they fit, pretty darn close to the price you're asking for. So, yeah, I'll mention those if you're just like... Whatever Rob and Tom say, I'm going to put regular interior in-wall speakers. I'm like... The ones that I know will play really loud for a nice price would be HSU in-wall speakers, but those are $300 a pair. So I would end up pointing you over to Monoprice, because honestly, Outdoor Speaker Depot has just I don't know what's gone on, but they've gone for only the cheapest models, and they don't stock anything that I used to like anymore. So unfortunately, I used to go to Outdoor Speaker Depot all the time, but I don't see any in-wall models that I like from them anymore. So over at Monoprice, they've actually introduced a new series, which is nice because it's pretty much all aluminum based, and it's a little bit nicer, and that's the Sycamore series over at Monoprice. It's $120 for a pair of their in-wall speakers. So I still don't consider them exterior or right for this choice, but look at the Monoprice Sycamore if you're just willing to say, okay, interior speakers, that's what I'm going for, and I want them to be rectangles and not round.
His direct burial speaker wire is going to end up being around 80 to 90 feet. Will 14 gauge speaker wire be the right choice? Yeah, that'll be fine.
It's totally fine. And coming up for his next question, you're going to want to use 14 gauge and not something thicker anyway. And 14 gauge is fine for 100, 150 feet. For a garage speaker, you're never going to notice that maybe 22 kilohertz got slightly attenuated. You can't hear it anyway. Yeah.
At the moment, he uses the Zone's 2 RCA pre-outs of his Denon X2200W to connect to his Dayton APA 102 amplifier that powers his patio speakers. He's thinking he'll typically be playing the same source for the patio in the garage at all times. I got a real issue with that too, but let's just go on. So he connect a second Dayton amp to the Zone 2 pre-outs? Would he chain the two amps together? How would the connections work? Well, I mean, I don't know that I would chain them together. If you could connect them both to this, you could have a Y splitter on the RCA outs.
Just a Y splitter from the RCA out to feed both amplifiers simultaneously. That's as far as the connection path.
That's fine. I mean, yeah. I would steer you away from, whenever these speakers play, these other speakers also play. Because invariably there's going to be a time where you only want one and not the other. Like you're going to be working in your garage. It's going to be late. You'll have the garage closed.
He can do that with his next question, which is having an independent variable control just for
well,
the
he could do it the way that we're talking about, as long as you turn off the amplifier that's on his patio. You could do that manually.
That's true.
But yeah, just Y splitters on your RCA outs.
Yeah, as far as connection path, that's all you need. Yeah.
So he'd like to be able to control the volume in the garage independent of the volume on the patio. If he gets an external volume control, how much power would he lose in the garage by having that volume control in line, and how should he choose which volume control to buy for this amplification? There's volume control on the APA. There's volume control on it.
Manual, yeah.
Yeah. So he wants not manual? I mean, with automatic?
I guess so, or maybe he's thinking that the amplifiers will live right beside his AV receiver and he's just going to run long speaker wires. So when he's in the garage, he wouldn't have physical access to the APA amplifier inside his house, right? He's in the garage.
Right.
So, I mean, they make just very simple inline like volume knobs that would just be on the wall as long as you're fine with a physical control, and those are very inexpensive. Parts Express sells them, and it is just 14 gauge speaker wire into that knob and 14 gauge speaker wire back out.
Right.
You tend to lose just 3 decibels all the time just from having that thing in there, and then of course all it can do is further attenuate the signal. It's not an amplifier, can't make it any louder, so it does tend to be 3 decibels quieter than just what's coming directly out of the pre-outs. You lose 3 decibels and then you can make it much quieter than that, of course. So that's about how much power you should expect to lose. There are ones that do have an IR remote. The price of those jumps up to about $90. It's the same thing. It's still just speaker wire in, speaker wire out, but now it has a remote control. Most of those that I saw, you have to go to a deeper outlet box. You can't just use a standard wall outlet switch. You have to have the deeper box for most of those. So just be aware of that if you want the one that has a remote. And then if you also want to be able to send control all the way from the remote in your garage back through that switch to your AV receiver to do things by a remote control, you can do that with an Ethernet cable, but then you'd have to have some kind of adapter on the end that plugs into your regular AV receiver. So probably easier just to use a Harmony as far as controlling things back in the room. But yeah, if you want an IR volume control and a switch that just lowers the volume in the garage, those are available, and it looks like they cost about $90 from Parts Express, or you can get the cheap one that's just a physical knob.
Yeah. So if you guys are wondering, those of you that are watching the video, if you're wondering why I keep looking over to the right, I've got the APA 100 right over there. So I'm looking over at it going, it's got balance.
It's got gain knobs, yeah.
Yeah, it's got a gain knob, which mine's turned all the way up, of course. All right, Dan. How are we time-wise? All right. A few months back, Dan was trying to figure out how to position his surround and surround back speakers. He has bulkheads on both side walls right in between his 2 rows of seats, so surround speakers placed in front of or behind the bulkheads wouldn't really work for both rows, and with his collection of Paradigm Tower speakers and only one pair of bookshelf speakers plus a pair of Paradigm's adaptive dipole speakers, he wasn't sure what to do. Rob suggested mounting the adaptive dipole speakers on the back wall, even though we usually say to use monopole surround back speakers. That was partially due to logistics and the collection of speakers Dan already owned, and partially due to how close his back row of seats are to his back wall. Rob also suggested using, I must not have been on this podcast.
It was with Lee.
Because I wouldn't have agreed with any of that. Rob also suggested using his one pair of bookshelf speakers plus a pair of tower speakers as 2 pairs of side surround speakers, so that each row of seats would have its own pair of side surround speaker, one in front of the bulkheads and the other behind the bulkheads. Having the adaptive bipole speakers on the back wall turned out better than Dan had expected and made them less distracting for the back row of seats, but it still sounded directional enough for good effects in the front row of seats. Oh, good. I wouldn't have recommended it, but I'm glad it worked out. Unfortunately, the 2 pair of side surround speakers just didn't physically fit, since his back row seats come very close to the side wall, so we need another solution. So he upgraded all of his speakers to the Paradigm Prestige series. The money is just a flowing. He's extremely happy with them and finally cured his upgrade itis. And since his previous adaptive dipoles on the back walls wound up sounding so much better than expected, he was willing to give the Prestige series adaptive dipole models a try. He agonized over dipoles versus bookshelves, but ended up with 4 of the adaptive dipoles and since they're low profile and flush mounted to the walls, he was able to mount the side surrounds on his bulkheads, and now he gets great effect in both rows. The sweet spot is huge, and it all started with our suggestion of trying his previous dipoles on the back wall, so he's super happy with the end result. It's a really nice looking speaker theater he's got here.
Oh yeah,
honestly, it's very
those are
great.
really nice speakers. The Paradigm Prestige series, those are lovely. If that doesn't cure your upgrade-itis, you might be incurable.
He still has 2 subwoofers up front.
He does.
What's up with that? Yeah. So when you ran this Anthem room correction, the newly upgrade Genesis version, it set the crossovers for his new surround and surround back speakers to 120 and 140 hertz respectively. Is that too high? Is it bad? He's been listening. He can't localize the bass with these settings, but should he manually change them to 80 hertz anyways? I would leave them, probably.
Yeah. I mean, it's even in line with Paradigm's own specs. They're like minus 3 dB point is, I think, 125 on those. That's part of being a dipole. That gets you that. It gets you that cancellation right there, and it tends to lead to a not as deep bass extension, which is the case.
Yeah, my rule of thumb on crossover settings are if it says it lower than 80 hertz, put it back to 80 hertz. If it says it higher than 80 hertz, leave it alone.
In agreement,
that's what I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think it's fine. I mean, you said it yourself. You're not listening to it going, oh, wait a second. Whenever something comes out of the surround, I'm like, that my subwoofer's up front, not there. You're not noticing that, so leave it as is.
So he's adding acoustic treatments to his room now, and he's getting them from Acoustic Panels Canada, which was another AVRant recommendation. He says they've been great to deal with. He's getting 9 2-foot by 4-foot panels with plans to put 3 on each side wall and the other 3 on the ceiling. He then plans to make floor-to-ceiling corner bass traps, plus filling in the indent in the middle of his back wall. For the corner traps, should he use the super chunk design where you just cut out rectangles of insulation and stack them, or would simply straddling the corners with insulation and leaving an air gap be just as effective? How thick should the insulation in the corner bass traps be?
Sorry, that should have said triangles of insulation,
what did
not
I say?
rectangles. I wrote rectangles, and you wrote red rectangles, which is understandable. Yeah,
I thought triangles.
It is triangles. I'll change it now because it's so useful.
So I mean, if you take a 2-foot by 4-foot panel and you straddle the corner, that's very similar to the effect that you get as far as my recollection of doing the super chunk method, which is all the way up. The air gap plus the 2 inches of insulation, or 4 inches of insulation.
Yeah, I would make it thicker than just 2-inch. Like if you're doing the method where there is an air gap behind it, it's not just the super chunks. I would make the insulation itself at least 4 inches thick, maybe even thicker.
I am not going to recommend that you do that in this home theater.
Oh,
and the reason is that it is a clunkier solution.
It is
unless you end up like beveling the corners so it sits flush on the wall.
Which you could do. I mean, you're still using a little bit less material because you're beveling it in, but you're not. I mean, the reason the super chunks people go for it is because it's easy cuts. Yeah. Right? You just cut the 2x4 in half, so now it's a square, and then you cut it diagonally, and you have all these triangles. Like, it's easy cuts, so it's the labor part of it that's a lot easier, rather than you stack all these things up, and then you bevel the edges, and then wrapping that in fabric is a little bit more difficult than just triangles, so it's all of that stuff.
To fit in your corner and everything perfectly.
That's right.
I think that going with the super chunk method in your situation is better because it's going to be a little bit smaller as far as how far off the wall it sits. Mm-hmm. Even with the panel that we're talking about where you beveled it, it's still going to come into the room farther. Yeah. And I think it's going to look nicer. Just it's going to be you have such a clean home theater already.
Is easier to build.
Yeah.
So
you have such a clean home theater. I would hate to see a 2-foot by 4-foot by 4-inch or 6-inch panel straddling some corner, floor to ceiling, and
Yeah, because the differences in performance are nothing enough that I would worry about either direction.
No, I wouldn't either. This is going to be 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's just going to look nicer with the super chunk method, so that's what I would go.
Agreed.
So he'll mostly be using safe and sound rock wool insulation to make his DIY traps, but he also has some leftover compressed rock wool from a previous project. The compressed rock wool is quite a bit more rigid and denser than the safe and sound insulation. So should he use the compressed stuff in conjunction with the safe and sound? Use all compressed instead, or avoid using the compressed stuff? I actually haven't heard of the compressed stuff, but my idea would be that it might not allow the air to pass through as easily, which
sounds like it's the fireboard you would put up against a basement foundation. That's what that sounds like to me. And stuff.
If the air doesn't pass through, it bounces off.
Yeah.
And if the sound bounces off, you've made a reflector and not an absorber.
Yeah.
So, I would definitely stick with the regular stuff.
Since we've decided on just doing the super chunks, it's just easier to work with just the softer, safe and sound. Just use all that, cut yourself a bunch of triangles, and it's really quite easy.
All right. Carl has dedicated. Carl has a room dedicated to being his media room. It's roughly 11.5 by 16 by 8, but there's a nook at the front that is 6.5 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep. It used to be perfect for a big rear projection TV, and when he was using his 60-inch plasma, he had his front main speakers on either side within that nook as well. But he now has upgraded to a 75-inch Vizio P series. The TV fits just in the nook, but there's no room for speakers. That means his front, left, and right speakers now have to be moved back and forth because it blocks the door otherwise. So he's planning on rearranging the room so his TV's on one of the wider 16-foot walls. He wants our advice on upgrading his sound quality as a whole when he makes that change. All right, so basically the door on the front left corner. So the TV fits in the nook up front, which is centered on the wall, but the door opens up and basically it doesn't hit the TV, but it gets awfully close to the edge of the TV.
Right.
So you can't just put a speaker back there. He's got his bookshelf speakers on stands, and it looks like he's got a front right subwoofer, and I can't tell, his equipment rack may be in the back. I don't know what it is back there.
Yeah, for the moment, but he's thinking of rotating the whole thing 90 degrees so that the wider wall will now be his front wall instead.
So he's tried the clap test, and with the bare walls right now, the results aren't great. So, yeah, I can imagine. So he will be putting up some absorption panels, but should he also get diffusion panels? What's the difference? Well, okay, so I was just having this conversation. I went out to dinner with my wife for Mother's Day, and I went around the restaurant and pointed out all the absorption panels that were in the restaurant. They had them like on every, like they had tile floor and tile on the wall, but like above the open kitchen area, all that was absorption. There was a whole wall that was absorption. I'm like, the reason that there's a lot of noise in here and it's all open, but you and I can still hear each other is because there's not as many reflections. So we were having this big conversation. They actually had diffusers in that room as well.
Okay.
But so most importantly in this room is not diffusion. It's absorption. You need as much absorption as you can get right now. I would not, if it were me, I would not even think about buying a diffusion until I had so much absorption I was worried that it was getting overabsorbed. And you're nowhere near having that happen yet. So I would focus on that. If you are absolutely dedicated to the idea of having some diffusion in this room, GIC makes the panels that are both absorptive and
That's right.
diffuse.
They have a scatter plate on top of an absorber. Yeah.
So that's what I would do. I would get those and put those wherever you felt like. I mean, we could talk about where to put them, but
I mean, just in terms of what's different, well, it's in the name, right? One of them is absorbing sound waves. I mean, technically what it's doing is the sound wave is passing through it. That is forcing it to change mediums, which makes some of it lose energy in the form of heat. So that's what an absorber is doing, whereas a diffuser is just an irregular shape that is still reflecting the sound, but not straight back in the direction that it came, or not like a billiard ball off a flat surface. It's like shooting a billiard ball at a crooked surface. It goes in some odd direction that you can't necessarily predict very easily. So it's scattering the sound from a diffuser, but not necessarily converting that energy into heat. So the energy is still in the room, but being scattered in different directions. Why would you want that? Well, measurements really tell the difference, right? What we're looking for really in our measurements is uniformity, right? People always think of a flat line. It's not necessarily that we're looking for a flat line. We're looking for uniformity from position to position, because if we have uniformity, we can equalize something that isn't a flat line into a flat line.
Right.
But if we don't have uniformity, we can't equalize very effectively, because we might make one position worse while making another position better. So we want uniformity. So what we tend to find is that absorption affects mostly the mid-range, some into the bass, and not very much into the treble at all, because at those frequencies the absorbers just act like reflectors. So what we'll find in our measurements as we measure in all of our seats is that absorption does a great job in the mid-range and the upper bass. Having multiple subwoofers is sort of the only viable way to do things in the deep bass. And then for our treble, if we're caring about that, we would use diffusers, because those do a better job of scattering the waves so much that we get better uniformity just through you're just blasting the treble everywhere, so it becomes more uniform that way. So you tend to need measurements to tell whether you even need or would benefit from diffusion, so focus on absorption for now.
Yeah, he's using a Denon 1612 receiver. It does not pass through 4K or HDR, so he will be upgrading it eventually. But for now, he's sending the video directly to his TV and then sending basic 5.1 Dolby Digital back to the receiver versus the ARC, or audio return channel, to his receiver. He's using 5 Polk monitor speakers and a leftover sub from an Onkyo home theater in the box. So he can guess we're going to say the first thing he should upgrade is a subwoofer. No, 2 subwoofers. And he really only cares about one seat. He'd like to keep the price to $500 or less. So SB1000, PB1000, RSL Speedwoofer 10S. In the other subs, he should look at maybe a Klipsch sub, which seems to be on sale quite frequently over at Fry's.
So the one seat, one sub, we can
do that.
We're all right with that. That's okay.
I'm looking back to see how big. 11.5 by 16 by 8. Okay, so it's not a huge room.
Definitely not.
But he definitely seems to be wanting a small sub because he's looking at the SBs, right?
Well, no, I mean, he
looked at PB1000.
Yeah,
that's the price range.
So he's saying out of this price range, what should he get? I mean, the room isn't so small that a PB1000 would be a problem in here.
That's the direction I was leading.
Just get a PB1000. I mean, you're done. It plays
especially if you're going to turn it long ways.
I know.
If you're going to turn it long ways, and then putting it up in one of the front corners or at the front of the room should be fairly doable.
It plays flat down to 20 hertz, so you're never going to have to question whether or not it's capable of playing accurately. If it doesn't play accurately, you know it's not the sub to blame. So, yeah, just get a PB1000. Done and done.
After the absorption panels and the subwoofer, what should be his next upgrade? A second subwoofer.
Yep, he only cares about the one seat, though, so we're okay.
I don't care. Okay. The receiver or speakers. Would we even recommend the speaker upgrade if he wants to keep the speaker upgrade budget to around $700 or less? What would we think of upgrading just his front 3 speakers and keeping his Polk monitor speakers as surround and surround backs?
Oh, I'm in favor of that.
Well,
upgrade the front 3 and keep the.
If you move this thing 90 degrees and face on the other wall, I would get rid of surround backs to begin with.
I would have to agree with that, because it's only going to be 11 feet front to back at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
You're going to be way too close to this thing.
Yeah.
So they're going to save some money there. I would be 100% okay with you upgrading even your front left and right and keeping the center for now. Spending $700 on that front left and right.
I'd prefer you do all front 3.
I would too, but if the difference is upgrading quality that's pretty significant, I would go with front left and right. Live with the Polk and use that as motivation for you to buy the center. And the surrounds will probably be fine for
I mean,
I
would take that $700, which would allow you to get 3 front speakers. Now, I mean, maybe he only wants to shop in stores, and I bring that up because that new JBL Stage series. I'm like, there's a nice option now. Really nice option that would fit in this price range, and you get your front 3. So JBL Stage if you only want to shop in stores. Now, it's our murderer's row, right? I mean,
right.
RBH, we're going to point you at RBH, the Impression series. That'll fit in here. I'm going to point you to Ascend because that'll fit in this price range too. And there are other great options as well.
SVS Prime speakers.
SVS Primes would be out. The Aperian's Intimus speakers would also be good. NHT's Super series could be really good. There are lots of great options in this price range, but we know we really like RBH, we really like Ascend, and I haven't even heard him yet, but I'm judging by the reviews that I trust and the design of those JBL Stage speakers. I'm like, there's nothing about those that makes me even question that these would be good.
Oh my God! Some people right now are like freaking out that we're actually talking about JBL in a positive way. That's not the synthesis.
I've been wanting to.
I know. People think we have vendettas against speakers or people. We're like, we just want them to be good, and when they're good, we'll talk about them.
Yes, we will.
All right, we'll do one more here. Anaheim Josh. Josh says we should forget about trying to pull him off ledges.
Yep.
It's
not going to happen,
man.
He's just like, I'm not pulling me back from the ledge, Josh. I'm over the edge, Josh. Let's just go.
So things keep changing. Now he's fully over the ledge now, so best to let him go at this point. He's going nuts, and now he just needs encouragement and guide his craziness in the right direction. We are back to the ledge. That's the right direction. First up, the permanently closed slide door is sealed off and covered with drywall now, so he actually has a front wall. Weird, but okay. Furthermore, his wife decided they might as well use this room for entertaining now, which means more people, which means a larger seating area, and now the theater area of 4,000 cubic feet room has expanded to about half the room. Before it was like a
quarter. It was like a
quarter of the room.
Yep.
So that's a bigger seating and longer viewing distance. The result, the 75-inch OLED has been canceled. He's getting QLED, whatever. And he's getting a 85-inch Sony. They'll be about 10 feet from screen. And after using our build-a cardboard box advice for a sub, he put tape up on the front wall to figure out what screen size he wanted. And his wife agreed that 75 inches is a bit too small now. 85 inches looks better. And she liked how the Sony looked in the store, so that was that.
That's fine. Sony makes a very nice 85-inch TV. That X900F is a fantastic 85-inch television. So that's great. I'm good with that.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
It didn't fit in his original budget, so that's why it didn't come up.
I know.
and he was only sitting 7 feet.
I'm
at the time.
reading ahead in the question here because this is the first time I read this question. That's what my exclamation was about, not about what you were saying, but about the next question, which all of us together can go. Just collective eye roll. Here we go. You guys ready? Work out your eyes here. Get the neck ready because you got to kind of throw it up there as you do the eye roll. I've got a 13 and 15-year-old son. I know all about eye rolls. All right. So his wife also listened to our podcast with him, and she said, "What do they mean you only care about one seat? What about the rest of us?" There goes the eye roll. Not about you, miss. About this man, your husband. Just look at him and give him, cross your arms and give him the look because he's got it coming. So now he needs dual subs. If he keeps the total subwoofer budget to $1,500, what should he get now? Well, now you want to pressurize the whole space, 4,000 cubic feet.
Well, I mean, you always kind of did, but
right,
now you want uniformity, which is it's a whole other kettle of fish.
Dude's name? Anna, Josh. All right, Mrs. Josh. All right, let's so that you understand, because I'm hoping that you're listening to this as well, and you can punch him in the shoulder right now. Okay, there you go. Now, Mrs. Josh, in order to get bass that is good for all of your seats, what you need to do is have uniform bass across all the seats. Now, subwoofers work differently than regular speakers. Regular speakers, in order to get the sound to you, they need to be pointed at you. Subwoofers operate in such a low frequency that it's like a truck going by outside. You know that there's a truck going by because it gets louder and then it goes away. But it's very hard to tell which direction that truck is going in because of how the bass is so low you can't get a direction from it.
Very long sound waves that bounced back and forth in your room a couple of times before they ever reached your ears.
Which means that in order to get good bass for all your seats, you have to properly place your subwoofers. This means placing them across the room from each other.
That's right.
Not across where you're seated in the room, because the bass doesn't care. The speakers don't care. Sound waves don't care where you are sitting. They care about the entire room. So in order to get uniform bass in the entire room so that you can have good bass for all the seats, the subwoofers need to be either directly across from each other in the room, which means that in the front, in the middle of the front wall, in the middle of the back wall, the middle of the side wall, the middle of the other side wall, or opposite corners, so front left corner, rear right corner, or they need to be mirrored in some way. So if the subwoofer, if you're like, okay, the place I want to put the subwoofer in the front of the room, where we're seated in the seating area is 2 feet in and then against the front wall, then the other subwoofer needs to be in the back corner, the opposite corner, 2 feet in and on the back wall, in order to get uniform bass, which means, yes, you are going to have bass bouncing all around the room. And once your theater room is, doing bass, it's doing bass all over the place. And you can't keep it. You can't keep it just over there. If you want to keep it just over there, you need to be able to wall around that entire area. Okay.
Yep.
So when we say you want to have good sound for all the seats, that's what we're talking about. Now you need 2 subwoofers. I'm going to recommend 2 PC 2000s.
Yep, that's what fits the budget.
So these are cylinder subs. They look a little bit like cute little water heaters, and if they have a nice little wooden top on them, and you can place things on them. And I give you permission. You punch your husband. We'll wait. Now, give you permission to put things on top of them for decorative purposes. You can also wrap them in fabric if you would like them to be different colors. They don't have to stay that color. That fabric can be draped across it. Doesn't have to be fitted. As long as the fabric is allows air to pass through. So in order to test this, you go to your fabric store, you take the fabric, the people are going to think you're weird. Take the fabric, put it up to your mouth, and blow. When you blow through that fabric, if the fabric bubbles at all or offers you any resistance, it's no good for this purpose. Okay, it's no good for this purpose. But anything that allows air to go pass straight through, and you can ask for speaker grill cloth that might have different colors. You can buy that online fairly easily with different colors. But if you want something printed or whatever, you can find burlap. I mean, burlap sounds bad, but they actually make some really nice different colors and stuff of burlap, which will do this quite nicely. So you can do this at Joann's Fabrics or whatever, and you can dress them up however you like. Just know that anything you put on top of these subwoofers has to be anchored down in some way, which means
they do move.
A little bit of blue tack, or a little stuff that you might stick a poster up to a wall, but just put a little bit of that underneath there, and then just stick it down to the top, and now you have a decorative pedestal that gives you all the bass you want. And if you're like, well, I can't just have them in 2 corners, I need to have them in 4 corners in order to make it look symmetrical because of my OCD, well, now you need 4 subwoofers, and that's fine too.
Yeah, but we're not going to get down to 4 subs at $1,500. That would
We are
be
not.
suitable for this room size. Yeah, no, PC 2000s, even in 4,000 cubic feet, that is completely fine. Now, I know Josh is probably freaking out because he's like, I was going to go for 18-inch subs at one point, and now we're all the way down at PC 2000s. But no, Josh, this is what you need, and this is what fits your budget. So there you go.
So he asked, could he put both subs at the front of the room, 1/4 of the way from each side wall? It would look best and physically fit nicely, and SVS recommends it. No, they don't. Is that the right way to go? Yeah, they may have that on their website, but if you talk to them, they shouldn't.
Yeah, they still do.
It is not the right way to go. I just told you what the right way to go.
This is one of the things we disagree vehemently with SVS about. Now, I mean, if there is literally no other option, 2 subs at the front of your room is still better than only 1, because at least they have fully variable phase knobs on SVS subs, and you can, by trial and error, do change one of those variable phase knobs until you get as good uniformity as you can, but you are fighting against what the sound waves do in this room, just naturally speaking, whereas if you get them across the room from each other, you are not fighting the room and the sound waves nearly as much and not having to do so much trial and error with a fully variable phase knob. So if at all possible, get these 2 subs across the room from each other. If you absolutely cannot, okay, they both end up at the front. Just realize there's going to be a lot of trial and error involved in playing with the phase knob of one of those subs to try and get the best uniformity that you can.
So, Mrs. Josh, what this means is that Mr. Josh will have to be down in the home theater with a computer. He might spend $100 on a measurement mic. He'll have it set up and then have to take a bunch of different measurements. We're talking hours and hours and hours of work.
Oh yeah, give it a weekend.
Yeah, at least. Depending on how neurotic he's going to be. And honestly, ma'am, he's pretty neurotic. So I would highly recommend.
He also has friends who we know don't help on this front.
I know. What's up with those guys? We don't like them. We don't approve of his friends. So put the subs across the room from each other, and that solves everything without having to do anything.
On this podcast,
I don't care. He said talk him off a ledge, push him over the ledge. I'm pushing him over the ledge. Here's your ledge, Josh. There you go.
We're not just pushing you off a ledge. We're smushing your face into the sidewalk.
That's right.
Yep.
Ask me another question. I dare you. Come at me, bro. Now,
we're awful.
I'm sorry. I mean, come on. So he says bigger screen, longer seating distance, front, left, right speakers further apart, and now he cares about more than one seat. He needs a center channel speaker now, right? How big? Do we remember what speakers he was going to go with? We went with something small, right? The NHGs,
no, he was going to keep his Silverline Audio, which are speakers we're not familiar with, but they're just standard bookshelf speakers, 6.5-inch woofer. Looked completely normal, nothing about them that I would suspect as being a problem in whatever way. But so now he's 10 feet away. Is that a problem? No. 10 feet is still close enough that those bookshelf speakers are fine. Ideally, you would get a center speaker that matches the output and frequency response of your bookshelf speakers. That's really all you need as far as the center goes. I don't know. I think he said they were about 15 years old. It doesn't seem to be a series that's available anymore.
Right.
But it sounds like those Silverlines are pretty even-keeled speakers. There's nothing weird about their design that would make me think they're particularly odd or have a strange characteristic to them. So I would just aim for a nice middle-of-the-road, neutral-sounding center. We're going to send you to RBH, aren't we?
That was the not only that I'm going to send you RBH, I'm going to send you RBH to buy the center channel and then wait until you call me back and say, dude, but what about the left and rights in the surrounds? So I get that, and I'm going to say yes. So just Mrs. Josh, I mean, our job is quite literally, we help people with their home theaters. That's what we do. And when they come to us and say, I want to buy something, we help them find the right thing to buy. Unfortunately, with Mr. Josh, what we have found is that he comes to us with, I want to spend $3,000. And we're like, dude, you don't have to spend any of that. You're fine with what you got. And then, but now you've actually changed it so that you have more people to worry about here. I would get the RBH Impression Series center channel speaker. There's the regular and the upgrade, was it called Elite?
The Elite, the Impression Elite. That's probably the one he'll get.
Oh, there's no chance. There's no chance he's not
RBH
getting the
Impression
Elite.
There you go.
I'm going to tell him that he doesn't need it, but he's going to buy it anyway. So you're going to get the Elite, and then he's going to look at those bookshelf speakers, and then he's going to try to talk you into tower speakers. You don't need tower speakers. Okay? I'm telling you right now.
True. If you got the Impression Elite bookshelf speakers, you're 10 feet away, man. You definitely don't need those towers.
Do not need and then that's kind of you'd end up there and you'd be fine. So we're now spending another $1,000, a little bit less than that, $700 I think on the front 3 speakers, somewhere around there. That sounds about right.
I'm not sure.
I thought they were like 160 a
The
pop.
Impression Elites.
Oh no, not for the Elites though. The Elites are more expensive. So probably about $1,000 for the front 3 speakers as well. So we've got about $1,500 for the subs, another $1,000, so $2,500 on the speakers, and now you're done with those speakers until he starts talking about the in-ceiling surrounds, and then now he wants Atmos. So it's your rabbit hole. He's digging it. We're not doing it. We're just answering questions here. So yeah,
it's $350 for the Impression Elite Center, and then $250 for each of the bookshelf speakers. So so we're at $850 there.
Yeah.
That's not so bad. $350 for the center. Just stop there. That's really all I need to do.
What did he come to us to begin? I don't even remember.
It was the small corner of the room, and it really all started with, should I even have surround speakers? That's kind of where it even started.
Right.
It might have just, this might have all stopped at 2.0. Look at where we are now.
I thought he was looking for a subwoofer or something.
He was looking for a TV choice. Because he was going to get the 82-inch edge lit. We got away from that. And now we're up to an 85-inch full array. So, okay.
At this point, you're going 85-inch full array. I mean, for the same price, you could get a projector in the screen and make this into a real theater.
Let's just pour some salt onto that smushed face into the sidewalk. Let's keep on going.
I mean, for the same price, Mrs. Josh, you could be looking at a 120-inch screen. Pretty much.
Maybe we spend a pretty penny on an ambient light rejecting screen too, so it doesn't even have to be pitch black and still look okay-ish.
I do not like that. No, just turn. It's a basement. Turn the lights off.
It's not a basement. It's like
whatever.
Converted sunroom.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Mm-hmm. All right, oodles of questions left, but we are done. So Damien D with a whole bunch of pictures and a whole bunch of questions here. Len I, Francis A, Daniel W, and Caesar. Those are the folks on our list. We'll get to you next week.
All right. We want to thank our 80 patrons over at patreon.com, including Mel. And we want to thank Rob for talking us up to SVS and Damien for talking us up to Accessories for Less. Thank you, gentlemen.
That's right. So it's patreon.com/AVRant Podcast if you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Thanks to Mel for being one of our 80 patrons. AVRant.com, and over on the right-hand side that says support the podcast if you'd like to do a one-time donation via PayPal. And thank you to Rob for talking us up to SVS and Damien for talking us up to Accessories for Less.
I sure hope Josh has a good sense of humor about this, because I certainly wasn't trying to...
Might have burned some bridges with that one.
hurt his feelings with it. But
end of the podcast. Who knows how many are even listening?
There you go. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.